Welcome to Biology 270, Introduction to Genetics at SWIC. This lecture will be mostly an overview of our course. Truly, I'm going to go relatively quickly. You've got the full PowerPoint on Brightspace that you can access if you don't want to write down all of these notes. We won't test a lot from this chapter in class. And in your study guide, I will give you some specifics about what we're doing because some of this is a review of prerequisites. Some of this is just kind of a general summary of what we're going to do in the course. You definitely need to know some of the history of genetics, some of the people that were important in the history of genetics, some of the early understanding, things like that. Again, check your study guide. Come see me in office hours if you have any questions. The number one question I always get from students is, do I have to read my textbook? I'm going to say that the answer is yes. You are in a 200 level course. In a university setting, genetics is often a 300 level course, and it transfers as a 300 level course up to SIUE and some other local universities. So I am expecting that you are putting in 200 or 300 level work for this course. The textbook that I picked, I love for its ease of reading and simplicity. It is one of the sort of more basic genetics textbooks. We can definitely get ones with far more detail that are fabulous. But this one really is great because it doesn't give you more than you need. It's a really great foundation. It should not take you too long to read each chapter, but that depends on how much you choose to take notes or highlight. Well, not highlight in an ebook, but choose to take notes and whatnot. Again, I do expect that you're reading your textbook. And our textbook is included in first day. We'll have instructions in class on how to access your textbook if you haven't already. For each of our chapters, I'm going to give you a really brief outline and some of the course objectives that we're going to be covering. If the lecture doesn't have the course objectives, you'll want to just go back to your study guide that I hand out in class. The study guide is also available on Brightspace for you to access, and really make sure that you can meet these objectives. Again, this is a 200 to 300 level course. We are working on these objectives, and some of the exams are going to be hard. Some of this is absolutely review information. Some of it is brand new things that you've never seen before, which is why it's a different course. All right, so we're going to start off with albinism as an example of some of the things that we're going to cover in this course. So albinism is a lack of melanin in pigment. Melanin is a pigment in the skin, eyes, and hair. So individuals that have lighter skin have less melanin in general, not even speaking about albinism, but just in general, individuals with light skin have less melanin, and darker skin color comes from higher concentrations of melanin in the surface skin cells. So albinism is a lack of that pigment regardless of the amount that is supposed to be there. So any individual, no matter how light or dark their skin should be naturally, could suffer from albinism. This example here is from the Oraibi tribe of the Hopis in northeast Arizona. This population has a particularly high concentration of individuals with albinism. And we'll talk about why that might be in just a second. So throughout this course, we're going to go through the different locations, chromosomes, types of inheritance, all of that. So for example, if we were studying albinism, we would learn that this is an autosomal recessive. Hopefully you all remember what autosomal recessive means. And so for most of the disorders or diseases that we talk about, we're going to talk about their inheritance pattern, how they are passed on. We're going to learn that autosomal recessives are pretty rare, and most of our inheritance patterns are far more complicated than the simple autosomal and recessive. We're going to learn a little bit about chromosomes. We're going to learn that all genes are situated on chromosomes, and we're going to learn that all genes have names, they have positions, they have sequences, specific locations. So for example, the albino gene here is called the OCA2 gene. It is found on chromosome 15 in humans. And we'll learn a little bit about how we learn the names. Generally, you are not going to be expected to know them ahead of time. We'll learn them if we need to know them. The reason that albinism is relatively high frequency in this population is that these individuals were regarded as special and were often given special privileges. So this is an example of how evolution works in a particular population. Now this would maybe fall under natural selection, maybe fall under a little bit of artificial selection, where these individuals had a special status and therefore were selected for increasing their frequency in the population. So increasing the frequency of that allele. So we are going to talk about, not a lot, but we are going to talk about how evolution and genetics specifically affect populations. And we are going to keep in mind throughout the entire semester that evolution is a theme. It is a mechanism of change in our populations, and evolution and genetics are very tightly linked. If you remember from Biology 101, we talked about allele frequencies in a population, and we talked about how traits that are acted on by evolution are coded in the genome. So that is our link between genetics and evolution, and why these two topics are such a driving force in biology. They are basically the foundation of all of the other parts of biology. All of our anatomy and physiology is driven by our genetics, and fixed, changed, etc., by evolution of those genetic traits. If we're talking about botany, all of our plant characteristics are driven by their genetics. Microbiology, we talk all the time about microbe antibiotic resistance. That's all related to their genetics. So we're going to spend a decent amount of time talking about evolution of traits, and then we'll spend a little time at the end talking about evolution of populations. So if we were in class, we would talk about these questions, just kind of think about them a little bit. I'm not going to spend any time here. Right, so why are you here? Well, you're probably here because somebody has said that genetics is important for your major or for your program. Again, it is sort of the foundation of all studies in biology. So if you're going on to be a biology major, genetics is important. Having an understanding of genetics is important. Aside from being here because you're required for your program or your major, genes are influencing our lives every day. Everything about you is influenced by your genes. And those genes can contribute to your personality, your physical characteristics, your health, your mental health, all of those things, how you interact with the world. So we can't separate our genes and the influence of genes on our lives from everything else. Your genes make you who you are. Some of who you are definitely is a choice. The way you interact might be controlled by genes, but some of it is a choice. But the fundamentals of who you are dictated by your genes and the genetic information that comes from your biological parents. This slide gives just some very broad examples of how genes affect our society and individuals as a whole. Many of our diseases and disorders are coded in our genome. Same thing with all of our agriculture, any of our livestock, wheat, tomatoes, corn, whatever it happens to be. We are looking at their genes constantly and constantly choosing the genes that we like, crossing particular breeds that we like. Genetics is extremely important in medicine and biotech, especially now. There's a lot of talk about personalized medicine and whatnot. Genes are really important. An understanding of genes is really important for understanding of medicine. Genes are important in our development. This relates back to who you are, your physical characteristics. And we're gonna, for all of these, we're gonna use examples as we go through. Our textbook is great on examples from a wide variety of things. So this class is not going to be human focused necessarily. It's going to focus on a whole variety of things because genetics is not just a human thing. Genetics is a plant thing and an animal thing. And we use a lot of model organisms to help us study all living organisms, but we use these to help us study humans and to help us sort of better our existence. All right, so we're going to talk a lot about our DNA. That's the whole point of this class, heredity. Genes are coded in the DNA. A genome is a complete set of genetic instructions for any organism. Genomes are generally going to be DNA. Most of our organisms, well, actually, all of our living organisms are DNA. We see viruses sometimes have RNA as their coding molecule. And that's kind of a weird thing. Viruses fall in this sort of gray area between living and non-living. All of our what we would characterize as living organisms are going to have DNA. However, there are a couple of organisms that have sort of unusual genetic code. So most of our organisms are going to have all of the same codons for expressing their proteins. DNA is going to code for RNA, going to code for protein in the same manner. There are a couple of weird organisms. There are some archaea, which is one of our prokaryotes, that have a different genetic code. Some of their codons code for different amino acids. And then there are a few ciliates, which are eukaryote. They fall into the protist category, which is the eukaryotes, the eukaryotic branch that leads to our plants, animals, and fungi. There are a couple of those who use different amino acids or different codes for the same amino acids, but for the most part, DNA is a universal code. So that genome is universal, which means that we can take a code from one organism, put it in another, and still make the protein that we want. Our genome is genome is copied during the process of replication. You would have learned this in Biology 101. We're going to go through that again. We're going to learn that in a little bit more detail, talk about some of the cool things that DNA polymerase does and all of the enzymes that are present there. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that genetics and evolution are very closely tied. Genetics provides that coding system for all living organisms. Again, it's a universal code except for those very, very odd examples. And we're going to assume that is universal, which means that the code is the same. The structure of the DNA is the same. The code is the same. The sequence might be different, but all of the processes, DNA replication, DNA transcription into RNA, RNA translation into protein, all of those processes are universal processes. So they essentially function the same way, whether you are a bacteria, a plant, a fungus, an animal, whatever you happen to be, those processes are the same. Are they identical? Nope, they're not. But they are so similar that we can transfer genetic information from one organism to another and express it, which is really, really cool. And that is going to be the basis of our ability to use biotechnology for research, medical, etc. The reason for this common genetic information is that all organisms evolved from a common ancestor about 4 billion years ago. So that first organism, whatever that was and however it came about, This would be Bio 102, by the way, just a plug if you haven't taken that one. The first organism would have used either DNA or RNA as its coding sequence. It is likely, or the commonly held theory is that that first coding molecule was DNA, and it eventually evolved, RNA, and eventually evolved into DNA. But that common ancestor would have had that common genetic source, and that is why all living organisms use nucleic acid as their basis for their coding molecules.